Hey guys, Edre here, and today I'm going to be doing a brand new album review. I'm going to be reviewing the brand new Smashing Pumpkins album, Sear. Now, this is, I guess, the part 2 of the Shiny Oh So Bright album they put out, I believe, 2 years ago now. An album that I was left relatively indifferent on. I thought it was definitely an improvement from some of the material Smashing Pumpkins had done over the past few years, Oceana, for example, even Zeitgeist. I do think that it was a slight improvement that may have had to do simply with the fact that it was in many ways a reunion album with James Iha coming back, as well as the drummer. So going into this album, I wasn't sure what to expect until they started dropping like 1,000 singles from this thing, releasing more than, I think, around half of the album. Uh, Admittedly, I didn't check them out too much. I checked out a few, and they definitely went down that synth electronic route once again. Now, to anybody that doesn't know, Smashing Pumpkins, this isn't anything brand new for them. I mean, they've been experimenting with more electronic elements in their sound, at least heavily since Adore. And Adore, I actually do think was a well-crafted album. I wouldn't say it's as good as Melancholy or Siamese Dream, let alone Gish, but I do think that it was a pretty solid stab at the sound. Now, over 20 years down the line, they are back at it again with probably their most electronic album since Adore. And for an album as long as it is, 20 songs, over 70 minutes long, for something so long, there's so little to actually say. But let me get into it. The first thing I picked up on right off the bat was that this was a much more pop-friendly, much more synth-pop-oriented album right off the bat. That's the first thing that really stuck out to me. And it has a very 80s flair to it with a very more modern touch added on, which I actually don't have too much of a problem with. You know, this album opens up with the song Color of Love, which is just quintessential down that exact thing I just described, that same exact kind of formula of that 80s kind of synth sound. But, you know, on songs like Confessions of a Dopamine Addict or even the title track, they seem to really, and this is a theme that shows up throughout the album, they seem to really tackle a sound that really does sound like a modern take on Black Celebration era, Depeche Mode, or even some Eurythmics influence in there as well. And while I don't necessarily have a huge issue with that, it's just the execution of these songs, and the execution of the style doesn't come across as original or fresh, but it instead comes across as the band rehashing ideas, and I'm not sure if I could really get down with that. You know, that's not the only sound they go with on this album. You know, the song Witch does seem to tackle a much more alternative metal sound while still having that synth element in there. And, you know, the song, and to be fair, I think on some of the more synth-oriented songs, they do actually have pretty nice sounding synthesizers in there. The luscious and beautiful synthesizers on the track The Hidden Sun sound very pretty, but the song itself just isn't. And this goes into my next major point in this review. Despite their stabs at several different styles, and despite them really taking a jab at, or really trying to do a more synth-oriented album, and despite me even liking the overall sound, many of the songs themselves just fall short of great. I mean, occasionally one song here or there seems to work out kind of well. They seem to occasionally hit a track here and there that does fit the sound well, such as Anno, Satana. I thought that one worked relatively good, but those are far and few. Most of the songs in here are relatively filler tracks that don't leave much of an impact and are just overall just bland songs that artificially sound much better than they actually are because the instrumentation's kind of pretty. You know, and perhaps the thing that really brings a lot of these songs down is the vocal melodies. You know, there's relatively odd and uninteresting melodies from not only the vocals, but just in general across this album. Many of the chord progressions just leave the listener empty. They don't seem to leave any lasting impact. And from a vocal standpoint, there's just some painfully boring vocal lines and choruses throughout this entire project. You know, on a song like Wrath or Ramona, these are songs that seem promising at the start, and you start kind of liking them, but it's just they never seem to go anywhere. Between the vocals and the unimpressive and just underwhelming choruses, to the more vocal lines here and there, and just that they don't land. They really don't land. And a lot of the instrumentals here, the actual structures of these songs are just painfully boring and don't really lead anywhere. And you could tell the parts where they're trying to leave something more impactful, they're trying to go to a climax, but it ends up falling short. And this is a theme that comes up time and time and time again on this album. At the end of the day here, I do think this was a very well-produced album. I don't have too many issues with the production here, and I do think it complements the style, but the actual songs themselves are just written kind of poorly. They're structured out kind of poorly as well, and you could add as much great production and as much beautiful synthesizers and electronic elements as you want. It won't change the fact that I actually just think the album is written kind of poorly, the songs are planned out poorly, and the overall songs themselves, when you boil them down to their core, are just weak. I really wanted to like this album. I really did want to like this album because I do enjoy it when they do experiment with a bit more electronic sounds, especially when they do it well. However, this is not one of those instances, and I was left relatively disappointed. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever heard, but I also wasn't that impressed. I have settled on giving Sear by Smashing Pumpkins a light 5 out of 10. Anybody that doesn't know my reviews should know that anything above a 5 is good, anything below a 5 is bad. So a 5 out of 10 is about as average as it gets. I didn't hate this thing. I appreciated their more risk-taking here. I even appreciated some of the more synth pads, even some of the arrangements. But the overall structures, the overall songs themselves, when you boil them down to their core, many of them are very weak. The melodies are weak. The structures are weak. And none of it really leaves that lasting of an impact on you. And overall, the sound they went with is a sound that's already been tried and trued by several other great artists from the 80s and 90s. So they really didn't add anything new to the genre either. So unfortunately, this new Smashing Pumpkins album gets an unfortunate 5 out of 10. That is it for now. Hope for the best. Goodbye.